The years continued to roll by the hopeful plains, and Sundersweep continued to flourish under the stewardship of its first 7 inhabitants. Monum Soakposts, a dwarf from a neighbouring settlement, declared their allegiance to Queen Thob by announcing themselves as Baroness of the Humble Portals. This extended Queen Thob's reach on the lands of Exmoxbazong as her ring of influence continued to grow. The militia training, led by newly appointed commander Kib Koganjim, was proceeding well, with the fortress's first full squadron, the Gilded Growls, being made up of volunteers from the fortress who had some previous fighting experience. Each squad was fitted with full iron armour and weapons, and though the steel equipment was still being produced, that was reserved for the captain of the Queen's Guard, B, and his hammerer Alex. Steel weapons and armour whose production was ceaselessly interrupted by the new requests from the nobles. Queen Thob demanding the ongoing production of rings, and the new mayor Zuglar demanding the fortress forge crossbow bolts. Though crossbow bolts seemed somewhat more useful to the fort than naked moldog bone rings, the fortress had still yet to create any crossbows, nor did they have any active militia members trained in using them. The mayor wouldn't be dissuaded, and taking his leadership advice from the Queen, he simply pointed at the crudely drawn picture of bolts and stamped his feet until the order was complete. As each of the original 7 members of the failed plan all enjoyed a bit of martial training, they formed a new special operations team, who would act as the Queen's personal squadron. Lockie particularly took a liking to this, as he hadn't been in a good brawl with anything larger than a groper in some time. This squad would be in charge of the fortress's defence, while the main army worked on pressuring the goblins out of the hamlets to the east. Whilst the special operations team were training in a newly built barracks, Smog's tavern keep apprentice interrupted with news. A human maceman had entered the inn and was asking for the location of the God-forsaken blizzards. Having no idea what that was, Smog sent the apprentice back to the bar and continued studying the art of the blade. Little did he know, the God-forsaken blizzards was a colloquial name for an artifact that sat within Sundersweep's very walls, and Niwir Poetskin was no ordinary maceman. Niwir was a well-known and successful treasure hunter, a member of the Moist Confederacy, and he'd just come face to face with his next prize. The human bone leggings, Bun Sothzolak, or as some would call God-forsaken blizzards, sat on its pedestal in the Queen's chambers, and not long after Niwir's shadow had darkened the glass case, had he made a swift exit through the caverns. It was only the next day that news had travelled to Bee and Alex that Niwir had been a treasure hunter all along, having rushed into the Queen's chambers to check on the artifacts. Bee and Alex found everything sitting in its place. Queen Thob had barely recognised that anyone had entered the room, and it wasn't until Alex asked if she'd seen Niwir that she even raised her eyes. Queen Thob disregarded the question, kicked up her feet onto her masterwork table, and instead said,
"Be a dear and fetch me a couple more rings, won't you? Doodlepip then."
Again having to find a solution for the lax security of the fortress, Alex and Bee went to consult with the expedition leader, Hex. They found him hauling coal to the furnaces, with a cohort of dwarven children trailing close behind him. He explained that the new mayor had recently demanded his own quarters be built, and for it to be adorned with metal statues depicting him surrounded by crossbow bolts. Hex was personally charged with making all of that happen, whilst also providing daycare for the fort's children. "I don't know, man. I don't even have any of my own kids," he said wearily. I guess I'll build a jail after this and we'll keep an eye out for him." As Hex shuffled off, looking completely defeated, the children followed, chanting in unison, "Daddy, Daddy, 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 Daddy." Once the children had been put to bed and the prison was built, the fort had a new role to fill: the Dungeon Master. The Dungeon Master's role is to interrogate prisoners, to uncover plots and crimes that would undermine the great fortress of Sundersweep. It was a job for a devious mind, a rascal, and a schemer, and no one in the fortress schemed harder than Wheels. Wheels donned his best cape, made his way to the new prison and sharpened his utensils, awaiting the inevitable capture of his first victim. He wouldn't have to wait long as the alarm rang out at the city gates. Whilst out fishing, Lockie had spotted Niue Poetskin sneaking through the underbrush. Unequipped for battle, Lockie dashed back to the barracks to sound the alarm. The Special Operations team armed themselves as quickly as possible and charged into the clearing.
You will not stand between me and the god-forsaken blizzards,
screamed Niue. Noticing that the militia had yet joined formation, Niue charged the line. He swung his sword at Alex Buchanan, who deftly dodged out of the way and returned a devastating counterblow to the knee, shattering bone and sending Niue to the ground. Alex swung his mace 2 more times into Niue's legs before swinging the mace in a thunderous uppercut, knocking Niue unconscious. Lockie, having arrived late to the battle, galoshes still damp, gripped his warhammer.
Now for my finishing move!
He raised his hammer above his head and released a dramatic battle cry. With the dexterity of an Olympian acrobat, he waltzed towards Niue's prone corpse, twirling his warhammer and his hips as he approached. But before he could deliver the final blow, Smog McPhinney launched himself at the unconscious human.
For my queens!
Smog shouted as he delivered a swift blow to the skull, finishing Niue for good.
That was my kill! My glory!
Shouted Lockie, throwing his hammer to the ground and stamping off in a huff. Though the fight had turned out to be a little anticlimactic, it was successful for a first militia campaign. B noted that the Special Operations team were woefully equipped when it came to armour, as the crafters were too busy building statues, bolts and rings for the nobility. But B would be held back from requisitioning more resources, as the horns of battle were about to blow again.